Today on the MotoMed podcast, we sit down with industry legend Bob Lutz and pick his brain on everything from why we as humans buy certain cars.
Automobile purchases have never been rational. They're always based on emotions, beliefs. A bad name will survive a great car. Like, who in the world would ever call a car a Golf?
To the good and the bad of major car companies. BMW. Well, how are they doing?
I think they have a design problem right now.
And even discuss our world at large.
The Chinese work their buns off. I mean, we used to think the Japanese had a serious work ethic, but it's nothing compared to the Chinese. There's one thing that the Europeans justly admire about the U.S. is the U.S., no matter how bad things look, always
Bob, we're back.
Yep.
It's been a while, but technically, it's been a while on camera. You and I have this tradition where in the summers I come to Michigan for Bob Boniface Cars in My Yard party, and you were kind enough to open up your home, and we have cigars in the backyard. I can't thank you enough for opening up your fantastic horse barn, or whatever this thing is called.
It's a riding arena. It's Terry's.
And then a little backdrop here. This has been your car since day one. This is what, VIN number 2?
VIN 2 was officially production and it was saleable, but it still contained a lot of pre-production parts.
Okay, Bob, let's switch gears from 1996 to modern day. You, retired for a couple of years, but you got a lot going on.
Well,
what are you doing with yourself?
A couple of years is an understatement. I've been officially retired since 2010. I'm on 2 Marine Corps related boards. One is Marine Corps University Foundation in Washington, D.C. The other is Marine Military Academy in Harlingen, Texas. So those are my sort of pro bono civic duty type boards. Then I'm on the board of Carbon Revolution, which is an Australian manufacturer of world's only volume producer of carbon fiber wheels, with customers like Ford, General Motors, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Land Rover, Range Rover, and so on. And then I'm chairman of that company, non-executive chairman. And then I'm also on the board of a very interesting company called Group 14, which makes a silicon compound material for lithium-ion battery anodes, which it's in production, scaling up still, but this material is proven to add 60% to energy density. It will last thousands of cycles as opposed to the usual norm of 1,000 cycles for a lithium-ion battery. To me, the number one feature is a dramatic reduction in recharge time. So this is going to hit the automotive industry, I would say, in 2 years' time.
Do you have some first customers you can share? First applications?
Well, Porsche is a major investor. And so you know that Volkswagen, Audi, and the whole Volkswagen group is in on it via Porsche's interest. And we have expressions of interest from every major battery manufacturer. And we also are starting to deliver to device manufacturers. There's other companies that are trying to get into silicone-based material, but Group 14 has, I would say, a 3 to 5 year lead in terms of intellectual property, which they are constantly developing and which is being vigorously protected.
And what are 3 reasons you say they've got a 3 to 5 year lead?
Some of the other competitors have built plants, but they can't produce the material. And whereas Group 14 is in full production and scaling up, adding more and more plants.
So really the benefit from what I'm hearing is you get significantly more density, which really would have the benefit not just the charge time, but also the actual footprint of the battery would be significantly smaller.
Say 400-mile battery, you can either keep the size and it becomes a 600-mile battery, or you can stay at 400 miles and make a dramatic reduction in the size and cost of the battery. And I would say with quick recharge times, how many internal combustion vehicles have a range of over 400 miles? Not many. Most of them around 300, 350 miles. So 400 miles is perfectly adequate, but it permits you to get a smaller, lighter, less expensive battery, which reduces the cost of an electric vehicle. And with a recharge time in minutes instead of hours, who cares whether you got 400 miles or 600 miles in the battery?
So what specifically, like you say you're on the board there, you have unusual experience with the OEMs. What specifically are you helping these guys with?
I think, I like to say overall business judgment.
Yeah.
Common sense, which I've always been in favor of the obvious solution when it's staring you in the face. And I like to urge to action as opposed to more analysis.
Yeah.
But let's face it, I think to some extent, I was put on that board at the request of GM Ventures, who at the time was thinking about an investment. In the fullness of time, they didn't. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. And I think, let's face it, I think part of my value on these boards, other than what I like to believe is my business acumen, is name recognition. When they go for financing, they say, well, who's on your board? They say, well, we have Bob Lutz. And I think to some people that's like a guarantor of something. I'm not quite sure what.
Well, there is something I think you're overlooking. And I'm saying this because we had an experience, I want to say Friday night. So Bob Boniface's Cars in My Yard party, where he has all of the people who imagine, engineer, design, and build all the cars that are based here in Michigan. That includes Toyota R&D, because they're just over here in Saline. They all come, they park. We had, I think, almost 200 cars. We had probably 350 people. We're all drinking beer, having a good time. And what's funny, you, of course, come up. And everybody loves to share their favorite Bob Lutz story. And it's always surrounded by common sense. Like, yeah, I mean, everybody realizes your business acumen. And cars like this, you brought this car to life. You're the one that selected the agency that came up with Freude am Fahren. You're the one that made the 3 Series from a 2002 replacement to the car that changed BMW. That's you. But everyone has this great story of you coming into a room and people are kind of, I don't know, there's no nice way to put this, jerking themselves off. And you're like, guys.
I remember once the back end portion of my GM time, and Mark Royce wanted to do a V-Series Escalade, which was sort of at the end of the cycle of the current Escalade, and it wasn't very much investment, and product planning got a hold of it, and they did the so-called substitution analysis, which is, if we do this, what other GM products would it displace? And I sat through this presentation, and it was going to, if we did 500 V-Series Escalades a year, it would substitute something like 279 Corvettes and a certain number of Escalades, lower series Escalades that we would have sold anyway. And there was a net add of 50 units. And I sat through this presentation that everybody took seriously. And I said, I have a problem with your numbers. Oh, really? Well, what is it, Mr. Lutz? I said, are you sure it's 379 Corvettes that would be displaced? I'm thinking more like 378, or maybe even maybe it was 380. And I said, you know, guys, this is all stupid. This is an analysis. Some guy in a back room pulled those numbers out of the air.
Yeah.
And they said, no. He said, what makes you think that a V-Series Cadillac with a 6.2 liter, at the time it would have been, I don't know, 500 horsepower.
Yeah.
What makes you think that that's going to displace a Corvette? Well, a lot of Corvette buyers don't buy it because it's a two-seat sports car. They buy it because it's the fastest vehicle GM makes. I said, that's not true. You're not going to get a potential Corvette buyer into an Escalade just because the Escalade has somewhat more horsepower. At any rate, I didn't like the program. It was, Escalade was sold out anyway. There was no point. And I finally turned it down, and it resurfaced years later for for a more legitimate reason, with the Escalade now being, of course, the internal combustion flagship of Cadillac, and probably, I don't know this for a fact, but I surmise the creator of the bulk of the profits that the Cadillac division makes.
So a couple of huge points about this. Number one, it isn't really just General Motors that does this. It's other companies that might call it something different, correct?
Yeah, Ford calls it cannibalization. I think Chrysler called it cannibalization. And it's real, because it would be naive to think that a new model is going to be 100% additional business. It isn't. It's going to draw some from competition, but it's also going to substitute some of the stuff in your own showroom. And one of the things that many highly intelligent, super analytical people in the car business and across all companies have never grasped is that the substitution doesn't take place in that broad market. I know that infinite sea of customers sorting through the internet looking for it takes place at the dealership, because the broader the product line gets, the more do the dealers decide, hey, I can't deal with this breadth of stuff. I can only afford so many salespeople, and this product line is now so broad, I just can't handle it. So the dealer makes the selection, and they'll only order certain things, and that's what they have. That's what their sales force focuses on, and that's what they'll move. I first found that when I was living in Great Britain, and I went to my local motorcycle dealer who had interesting two brands. He had Honda and BMW, arguably two of the best motorcycle brands in the world. And I was interested, just for interest's sake, with Honda at the time made a 500cc two-cylinder turbo. And I said, have you got one of those? And
So like CX500 Turbo?
I forget what it
It was
was.
a hell of a bike, by the pearl white one with a beautiful fairing.
I don't remember the aesthetics.
Wow,
but
Michigan summer
I
then.
remember it was a 500cc turbo, and the dealer said, oh, I'm not stocking that. I said, why not? I mean, you might sell. He said, look, the Honda bike product line has 275 models. I can't stock them all. And for this turbo, they wanted one of my techs to go to school for 2 weeks on it. I can't afford to lose a technician for 2 weeks, so I just passed on it. So the dealers make a lot of the substitution decisions, and in the fullness of time, that bike was a flop. Never went anywhere. A lot of people in the automobile industry, they think, here we are, the factory, and down here is the market. And they forget that it goes through this funnel called dealerships. The dealerships filter out stuff that's inconvenient for them.
So is that changing now as we get more direct-to-consumer models? Like, for example, famously Tesla, they sell their cars direct. Lucid sells their car direct. But when I see a Lucid or a Tesla going down the road, it's the same German rainbow color scheme, silver, white, or black.
Yeah.
And usually I thought that was the dealer that dictated that. But here people are picking and everybody wants the white on white Tesla or the black on gray interior Lucid. What's going on there?
I think it probably has something to do with availability. People do like white and silver, always have.
Is that
Always in the top runners.
Is that a function of people like white and silver because they like white and silver, or they like white and silver because the dealers, this filter has rammed it down their throat so much?
I think people genuinely like white and silver.
Okay, so we've learned something today.
Yeah.
Okay, now you know what we're going to do? We're going to switch gears.
Okay.
You and I are going to do our famous report cards now.
All right.
Which one of your alumni do you want to start with? You want to start with Ford, being you already brought them up?
Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
So let's do your famous SWOT analysis. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Opportunities and threats?
I think right now Ford is showing some brilliance in design. I mean, we talked about the Bronco, which I think is a smash hit, an absolutely exceptionally well executed product program. They were able to roll it out in infinite variety, long chassis, short chassis, hard top, soft top, with, removable doors, non-removable doors, two-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, sport for, I mean, it's the varieties of Broncos is mind-boggling. And yet I assume they have some sort of Lego type system where they can combine it all in a rational manner, but it's good. The design of the current Lincoln mid-size sport utilities, like the Aviator, is I think superb. Full-size pickup trucks, the F-150, I think making it out of aluminum was needless expense because GM and Ram remained with steel and are maybe, I don't know whether they're heavier or lighter, but get the same fuel economy. So I think that's probably a needless on cost. And Ford seems to have jumped on board the electrification bandwagon quicker than GM did, but less successfully.
How so?
Well, their EVs are really not selling well. And especially the full-size truck EVs have, they were converted from IC vehicles, whereas GM elected to do unique architectures for the electric Tahoe and the electric Yukon and the electric Escalade is a dedicated architecture, which is lighter, more efficient, bigger battery, and GM has a 400-mile plus range, and the Fords are around 200. Last I checked.
The counter to that, you talk to people, and I originally was like, well, the Ford isn't that interesting in terms of for an electric vehicle. But I spent some time talking to people, fleet people, like the plumbers who buy 5 of them, or the electricians who buy 5 of them. And what I was fascinated by, at least from my perspective, Ford had a choice. They could do the thing on its own platform, make it a different vehicle, or do the existing platform. I shouldn't say platform. Let's call it the innovation of the bed. That's what I think they were going for. Let's keep it looking like an F-150 so we can do the same bed. So the ecosystem of all the accessories works in our electric truck. I think that's kind of the genius move. Was that a move? Was that a wrong
trouble is they're
move?
losing money on them. They're losing prodigious amounts of money on the EVs.
But GM, same thing.
Not so sure.
We'll get to that. Let's stick with Ford. Okay, so one of the threats you're saying is they went in early.
They went in early, got a first mover advantage, and like the electric Mustang is a
Yeah.
nice car, very fast, a great EV, but it's hopelessly unprofitable. And I think GM stepped back, waited half a generation, and is doing much more competitive and lower cost EVs.
So does Ford have a way out of this? Like, what would you suggest they do in this?
These things are always generational, and I think Ford has a good CEO who was a genuine dyed-in-the-wool car guy, and the word at Ford is, yeah, but he's not a very good businessman. Well, I know what that means. I had the same rap. It means he loves the product, he loves the customer, and he'll do the right vehicles at the right time, and he'll let the finance guys work out the numbers and make sure that they work. But he's oriented towards product first, and everything else comes after that. And that's basically the recipe for success.
Your famous line is, there's no problem good product can't fix.
That's true.
I've stolen that from you.
You can have second-rate purchasing, not quite state-of-the-art manufacturing, a bad PR department, a non-existing government relations department. All of those things can be not quite where they should be, but if the product is a home run, it swamps all the other deficiencies. Whereas if your product is not right, you can have the best plants in the world, a super efficient purchasing department, fine government relations, great PR, wonderful finance department. Everything can be perfect. But if the product isn't, it's like the old story. We buy the best ingredients, we have the most modern plants, the best distribution, the best advertising. What could possibly be wrong? Sir, the dogs don't like the dog food.
That's another hit of yours.
They don't like the way our product tastes.
Okay, so let's go back to the dog food, the actual product. Jim very famously recently said, you know what? We've been doing these big trucks. We've been doing all this electric stuff. I don't think that's the direction to go. He's been kind of the contrarian investor, say, I think we need a small car again. What's your thought on that?
Probably the right tactical move. And
How
I would
so?
say,
Why is it the right tactical move?
because what was a de facto electric vehicle mandate under the Biden administration
And Brussels, and Brussels as well.
Yeah.
Not just here, it was Brussels too.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm leaving Europe out of it for a minute. But, basically, the automobile business had no choice. They had to go all in on electric vehicles. And everybody was sort of wondering, what are we going to do when the public doesn't want these? Because every sign was electric vehicles were being pushed faster and harder than the public's willingness to absorb them. And that's now come to an end. And electric EVs are now optional. They'll continue. And I think you and I may have a point of disagreement on this, but I do believe EVs are the future of automotive transportation, especially with the improvements in battery technology that we were just talking about earlier. There will no longer be any case to be made for an internal combustion engine except nostalgia.
So for the avoidance of doubt, you're saying, even with the twisting of the arm of Brussels and Washington, you're saying might be a different timeline once we get the grid and the infrastructure and all the technology sorted. You're saying EV could take over 100% of the market.
Yeah, well, that's a long time out.
Long.
But
50 years, 25 years?
yeah, possibly. Yeah, 30.
It goes.
But EVs will continue. The EV growth will continue, and I know GM is still committed to rolling out successful EVs, but you have to think they're going to do the same as Ford, which is plans to phase out internal combustion will be reversed, and any intelligent automobile, I would be very surprised if the Dodge Charger, which now is all electric, be very surprised if that stays all electric.
So Bob, I'm in a little bit behind the scenes here. I had the Dodge Charger a couple months ago, and you know me, I'm a big fan of Ralph, so I'm very biased about Ralph. You worked with him famously. I love what he did with that car. I love the look of the car. I thought it was cool, man. And yeah, it's big. The proportions, I think, are unique. But God help you, man, that thing crapped out on me twice while I had it. And they fixed it, brought it back, and it crapped out again even worse. And I look at it as that was an opportunity missed. Dodge was the wrong place to put the EV car, the EV technology. What they should have done was brought that car to the US, changed the front end, and called it a Peugeot. They could have gotten away with a high price, and they could have gotten away with, let's just say, the less than stellar reliability of that car.
Yeah, well, the less than stellar reliability is a lack of proper development and getting it to the public before it's ready, and that's always a mistake. And there's always the desire to get the car out, and somebody in senior management says, "I'm going to hold you to that date. I'm tired of slippage. We're going to launch on such and such a date." The so-called, CEO edicts, which have been responsible for a lot of bad cars. But as I always said, I'd rather have a good car 6 months late than a bad one on time. And but the Dodge Charger may have been an unfortunate selection for a full EV, forgetting your reliability issue, which we'll just call infant mortality. The Dodge Charger was the epitome of the thundering V8 beast.
Absolutely.
And it was the epitome of, they're going to have to pry the internal combustion out of my cold, dead hands. And to make that one an EV was probably not the right. It would be like General Motors canceling the Corvette IC version and making all Corvettes electric. Probably pick up performance, etc. But
people don't buy that.
No, it's
Porsche
weird,
learned that lesson.
But automobile purchases have never been rational. They're always based on emotions, beliefs.
Even at Toyota, even at like the Corolla level.
Well, yeah, even there, because I don't think people analyze whether the Corolla is the best alternative in small cars out there right now. It may be, but quite possibly it's not, with all of the good Korean stuff out there.
Yeah.
But people default to Toyota because they have, in their belief system, Toyota is infallible, reliable, long-lasting. If you want solid value, car that'll last, never give you trouble, buy Toyota. People still believe that, whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
And these belief systems, very often they're passed on from father to son. Like there are brands that I don't like because my father disliked them.
Like what one?
Volvo is one. He hated the Swedish socialist system, and Saab was not big enough on the horizon for him to worry about, but he hated Volvo. And then many Swiss disliked Mercedes-Benz because it was the symbol of Nazi oppression.
Yeah.
And after the war, the symbol of fat post-war German black marketeer, freshly minted millionaires with their fat wives coming to Switzerland in huge long camel hair coats in a Mercedes 300. So it
was in bad taste.
And these beliefs stay with you.
Okay, so I don't want to get too far away from this EV thing. I want to say 15 years ago, I stood in front of your garage over here with you. I drove up in a then new Malibu, and you had that LaSalle you got.
Yeah.
We walked around, we talked about the LaSalle, and you cataloged the late 70s, early 70s to the late 70s, early 80s of the American car industry. And you said one of the biggest troubles was the whole system. They had to keelhaul the entire system. That was that exact term you used. Keelhaul the entire system, and they were caught flat-footed. And as a result, it took them years to catch up.
On quality, on execution quality.
Everything, yeah. Is that the same what's going on with EV, or is it worse with EV, or are they more prepared with EV?
They're more prepared. And the technology, frankly, is easier. The difficult part to sort out is the software, but batteries are, you buy them. Electric motors, you buy them. Control electronics, you buy them. And then you have to integrate the whole system into your car. But compared to creating new internal combustion architectures, it's really somewhat trivial.
So
Far fewer moving parts.
okay, so talking about internal combustion, I do want to come back to the Charger a little bit. The plan wasn't always for it to have a gas engine. It was they were going to do the Porsche thing, where they were going to do all EV, but someone smartly over there said, it's probably not a good idea. And so they've already committed to the 6-cylinder, the Hurricane. It's in the Grand Wagoneer. Something tells me I think they may somehow find a way to
They'll
shoehorn
find
it.
a way to put a Hemi in
I
it.
think they will, because they don't sell
Listen,
at all.
If a 6 fits, they could make a Hemi fit.
So what are some things, before we move back over to Chrysler, Ford, what are some threats they have right now?
Obviously, the same threat that everybody else has, which is the global rise of Chinese vehicles, which I think is a serious threat. But on the other hand, I think the U.S. market is relatively secure, and I think they're facing the same competitive threats as always, which is General Motors, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're doing a superb job in the same product categories where Ford is strong, arguably at this point slightly ahead in EVs. Also very good in stylistic execution. Although I to this day I wish GM had thought of the Bronco and not Ford, because
Biggest miss, they call that stupid front-wheel drive thing the Blazer?
yeah,
They should have made it like a 4Runner.
well, it's a hugely successful vehicle, but forget the name, and it was just the name they had available. So
As a car guy, I am offended.
yeah,
You should be offended too. Okay,
I've stopped worrying about names. I used to try to influence them when I was at the car companies, and sometimes I successfully picked names
yeah.
like Viper, but a bad name will survive a great car. Like, who in the world would ever call a car a Golf? A game where you hit a little ball with a stick?
And then they may call it a Rabbit.
Yeah.
Apparently golf wasn't good, so they call it a Rabbit, and it did its biggest market.
Could it be better? Yeah.
And we'll look back on it as a foolish decision. Okay, so at the risk of offending some folks in the audience, which you and I are very good at offending people, and it really doesn't bother us, let's talk about China a little bit as it relates to your the U.S. market, but some of your alumni. I am of the belief that the Chinese car market has matured at the cost of the car manufacturers that raced into that market. Costs be damned, we don't care about whatever deal we have to make with the Chinese Communist Party. And now it's kind of turned around to kind of bite them in the ass. And you've got now mature car companies exporting cars out to, say, the European market,
Yeah.
and they're eating everybody's lunch.
Yeah.
I see it as those cars are being dumped in the market. A RAV4 type vehicle, which is always going to sell well in Europe and here, they're able to sell it at I'll make it up 20% cheaper because you and I both know their costs are considerably lower for, let's say, not so straightforward reasons. I feel like the U.S. is trying to avoid that. How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think, first of all, I think the Trump administration is wisely going to keep Chinese products out and also keep them out if they try to come in via Mexico. So
Yes.
for a while, we've got the comfort of Fortress USA, which can only last so long. But it's one of the scary things about the Chinese automobile industry, which is in the process of a big shakeout, by the way. I mean, a lot of the indigenous manufacturers are not profitable and either in Chapter 11 or on the verge of Chapter 11 or being absorbed by the larger ones, etc. So it's like the teens and 20s in the U.S. when we went from like 300 car manufacturers down to a dozen, and ultimately 3 or 2.5 if you count Stellantis. So and ultimately their costs will rise because they have no legacy costs. They have no retirees to take care of. Whereas every Western car company has a huge financial obligation to
But isn't it more than that? They're paying their and then not just the car industry.
But I mean, part of it is
very below market wage.
Part of it is legacy costs. Part of it is low labor rates, and part of it is the Chinese work their buns off. I mean, we used to think the Japanese had a serious work ethic, but it's nothing compared to the Chinese, where car companies operate administratively in engineering, manufacturing, styling, 24/7, 3 shifts. And they'll do an entirely new model in 24 months, whereas the Western norm is 36 months. And, we're going to have to get on the stick. I mean, at least I see early on the Japanese threat, back in the 70s and 80s, Detroit poo-pooed it and said, well, if the American public really likes those little things, we'll produce them and we'll push them back out into the Pacific. And there was a huge false sense of security and a hubris that prevented Detroit, and the Japanese fed it. They'd visit our plants and they'd say, oh, so good. Oh, so modern. Oh, we could never be like this. Oh, thank you for showing us all this.
Yeah.
Oh, you are so generous because you are so big and so powerful. And we are tiny, tiny, tiny little.
Don't let them see it coming.
And everybody sucked it up and said, well, I guess we made their day. Yeah, we made their day, all right. Then they ate our lunch. That's not going to happen with China because everybody is aware of the threat. And what's to be done about it is another matter.
So what are 3 things we could do about it? If you were back running General Motors, what are 3 things you could do about it?
First of all, you study the hell out of them and figure out exactly what they're doing and what the benefits are. And then you have to figure out whether it's feasible in the U.S. or not. But this thing of product life cycle, creating new models or computer-aided testing, which Toyota tried one time, was disastrous. But, maybe it's better now. But explore ways to get that 36 months down to a more competitive 24 months. And then I guess after that is you have to start talking to the UAW about the disparity in American wages versus Chinese wages. And that would be an extremely tough sell because the UAW is not going to ever agree to having people work for Chinese wages.
I feel as if they went in the wrong direction at exactly the wrong time. Back when President Biden famously went on the picket line, which we'd never seen that before ever in the history of this country.
He was trying to get the UAW vote.
I totally get that. But what happened was they incented the wrong behavior. They were looking for, this is my view of the thing, they were looking for an increase in cost, lower productivity at exactly the time you need the opposite.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So how do you fix that?
You know what? I think it's with imports from, I mean, the obvious escape route when we had USMCA,
Yeah,
whatever it
Yeah.
was
NAFTA, then
the
UMSCA.
tester of NAFTA.
Yeah.
Everybody's escape route was Mexico. And that's effectively been blocked now.
In hindsight, was NAFTA a good idea?
I think the concept of NAFTA was a good idea, except you cannot have a free trade bloc unless you have roughly equal wages, roughly equal government regulation, roughly equal taxation, roughly equal social policies. And if you don't have those things, it's like Ross Perot says, there's a giant suction, the giant sucking sound, yeah.
Everyone laughed at him, but he was right.
Yeah.
So you brought up a bigger problem. You brought up the wages, which I think is a huge issue. But then you talked about like the 24/7 development cycle and just the work ethic of Chinese.
One of the reasons EVs are attractive is the relatively extremely low parts count, which makes them much more amenable to automation. And one sure way to eliminate labor is to automate. And I think we're well past the time when Roger Smith's paint robots were painting each other. I mean, this stuff is robust and reliable nowadays. And with AI, we can develop smart robots. And I think that's what everybody is. I think the answer is going to be technology, so much automation in the car that the labor cost, although high on a per unit or high per labor hour, but you get so few labor hours in the car that next to the material cost, it becomes trivial.
But how do you sell that to the unions? Because the only way to compete would be you have to have some automation.
I don't think the union can fight a trend towards automation. They just can't. I mean,
so it goes back to your very famous common sense. At some point, common sense is going to rule the day.
Common sense prevails. And, when it becomes a choice between fewer jobs and no jobs, the union is intelligent enough to opt for fewer jobs.
You brought up another interesting point, which I agree with you on. The Chinese, not just the Chinese, but other societies outwork us. They have a better work ethic. We've incented the wrong. I don't want to sound like an old man sitting in a rocking chair screaming, "Get off my lawn!" But that's what I'm about to say is going to sound like.
The old man sitting in the rocking chair. That's me.
Well, it's both of us. Actually, you're walking faster than me. A little bit behind the scenes. I pulled my back out, but I feel as if we've incented the wrong behavior in our society here.
Oh yeah, no question.
You're saying that product management's working 24 hours. That's not a union job. Do we even have the work ethic in our society? Does those middle managers do that kind of thing?
No single.
Or work faster?
No. If you look at our cultural background, it's largely European, and within the European, largely British. So, face it, the original population in the United States was British. And Britain was used to empire, where the hard slogging was done by India and all the colonies they had around the world. And the Brits were used to a comfortable lifestyle. And actually the upper classes looked down on people who, do you know that her husband actually works? And it was considered sort of, not quite comme il faut. And I think we've inherited a lot of that. The let's not overdo it. Let's get a let's get a solid work-life balance, et cetera, et cetera. And it's nice. We all probably should spend more time with our kids, but that's not the way other countries do it. And when you're competing with other countries, I think by the way, I mean, we're no worse than the European average in terms of lifestyle and unionization, work ethic.
Anything we're more productive.
Yeah, we are. So it's not like everything's terrible, but and one of the alarming trends post-COVID is so many young people elect not to work.
Bad social policy.
Just live off the government, live off of food stamps.
It'd be great if I could sit and do nothing all day and get paid. I'd love that. But that's not reality. At some point, the house of cards come falling in.
Yeah, and I think it's falling very rapidly now.
Do you think we have too much of that in our society? I know we're getting a little off cars, but it impacts what we're talking about. Do you think we have too much of that in our society where we've gotten past the point of no return, or is there a way to bring it back?
I don't think we're ever past the point of no return, because there's one thing that the Europeans justly admire about the U.S. is the U.S., no matter how bad things look, always pulls itself back from the brink and has the capacity for reinvention. We're good at that. As the British famously said, I think it's Churchill who said, you can always trust the Americans to do the right thing
It was Churchill.
the second or third time they try. But so we don't always get it right the first time,
Yeah.
but we self-correct. And right now we're seeing a massive, and for most of us, welcome self-correction with a focus back on merit as opposed to physical traits, skin
Totally agree.
color, gender,
Totally
sexual
agree.
proclivity, et cetera, et cetera. We're back to, that's all very nice, but what does he or she actually do? Is he or she competent? And I think the average American says, hey, I'm all for a lesbian president of the United States if she's a great leader of our country. I don't care. And but the important thing is she a great leader of our country? Is she a great CEO? Is she a great infantry colonel? Those are the things that matter to most Americans. I think most Americans are neither misogynists nor are they racist, but they deeply resent quotas that are not based on merit.
So at the risk again of pissing off the audience, let's go down that road a little bit here. What do you think happened first? I agree with you. I think people, the normies, ideally a society should cut off the extremes of both ends. But the normies, the people in the middle, did they change first, or did they change after the administration changed to say, okay, I don't have to put up with this anymore? What do you think happened first?
I think what sort of the great middle America, the 80% of the population that's politically and socially rational, is again cutting off the right extremist fringes and the left extremist fringes, was dissatisfied but had no voice except through the internet. But the media, as we know, are largely complicit in the, say, leftist view of things. I think a leader like Trump gives the silent majority permission to speak again.
And they spoke before he got elected or after he got elected?
They spoke through the election and now feel empowered. And Americans who are against DEI quotas now feel it's okay to say so. Whereas before, you took a risk if you said anything. And that's true for the military, it's true for industry, it's true for society at large. And a subject as controversial as climate change you were seriously at risk, placing yourself in harm's way if you expressed skepticism of man-made climate change, which of course never stopped me from being a vocal critic, but I was often ridiculed for it or criticized. And at GM, I was told to keep my views to myself, which I sometimes did.
Yeah, you didn't follow that one too well.
No, I mean...
That's why we love you.
So, at any rate, and now climate skepticism, I think, is taking the upper hand. I saw a statistic the other day that in the 80s, 40% of Americans believed that climate change was man-made, man-caused, or anthropogenic. In the last 10 years, that number was up to 60%, and it's now back down to 40%.
Wow, I didn't even see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Assuming that whatever I read was accurate, which
you got to do nowadays. You
Yeah.
have to look. I always talk to my girlfriend about this. You need to look at the source. It's not just what's being told to you, but what's the source. I'm a religious man. Be careful of false prophets is the way I put it. All of us here at Moto Man are super excited to not only have the podcast back, but for it to be its own show. And there we look to you for a little assistance. Can you help us grow the show? Two really easy ways to do that. First and foremost, if you're reaching out via YouTube or other streaming platforms, you click on subscribe, notifications, or more importantly, share these episodes with your friends, especially on Reddit. Now, if you're downloading these episodes, listening via podcast platforms, we'd ask you to rate us. The good stars are wonderful, but leaving a written review would be even better, especially sharing who was your favorite guest. So with that, I am incredibly grateful for your assistance in help growing this. And now, back to the episode. So let's go back to that other point you brought up. The DEI is changing, and that's impact. You and I are both pilots. That impact, obviously, that's been a huge thing with the aviation world. But you're still involved in both the corporate and, from what you told me, military worlds. Are you actually seeing that changing? Are you seeing that changing at like General Motors?
Well, I don't see anything at General Motors now because I've been gone
Australia.
for like, 15 years.
Yeah. I'll a little aside here. I'll never forget it. You announced your
But from
retirement.
what I'm told by colleagues that I occasionally see who are still at the company,
Yeah.
there has been a marked reversal back to common sense, back to what works.
And what about the companies you have a purview in, like the two that you're on the board? Do you see that changing there? Or was it ever a thing?
Well, I see myself occasionally being vocal about as a board member.
Yeah.
I mean, with an Australian company, it's not an issue. And by the way, Carbon Revolution CEO is black, so and one of the most competent senior executives I've ever dealt with broad experience in broad senior level experience in the aluminum wheel business, and this guy who would pick him as CEO.
Australian national?
Pardon?
Australian
No, U.S.
U.S. national.
And this guy, on a colorblind basis, you'd pick him as CEO.
Yeah.
So I think at Carbon Rev, DEI isn't an issue. I occasionally see things I feel are more reflective of past policies at Group 14, and then I react vocally via email. It says I think these statements, which are designed primarily for virtue signaling, are not necessary.
And do they listen to you?
Yeah.
So you see it has changed.
I think the momentum is back towards fairness. I mean, we're all for equal opportunity. This is what the liberals don't get. Everybody is for equal opportunities for people of all races, sexual proclivity, and religions, etc. But it's got to be based on merit. I mean, that's what makes our society work. If you start doling out senior positions on the basis of what's it matter, the senior guy just sits in an office and signs things anyway. If that were true, if leadership didn't matter, well, hell yeah, then do whatever you want and take incompetence at all levels from every race. Let's have a lottery, and if you win the lottery, you get the CEO spot. That's total insanity, and we know it. We know it doesn't work.
Now that brings us to another kind of related point. You speak to some folks in the industry, and I don't mean just the car industry, probably car journalists as well. They wax on poetically about how much farther China is ahead on electric cars. Question. Is that a function of what we're talking about? They just outwork us, or their cost structure is lower, or is it a function that the Chinese economy has invested heavily into mineral rights around the world, and it's more of a national security issue than it is, oh my God, we got to sell electric cars?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. I mean, nobody knows for sure, but they've made a lot of strategic moves that probably are in the long term geopolitical strategic interests of China and its industry. And by the way, I mean, China is not without its problems.
You and I know that, but very few people outside of it don't.
But so there is with their political system of it's rampant capitalism, but no freedom of expression, no freedom to voice dissident political opinions, et cetera, et cetera. That system cannot exist over long periods of time. At some point, it's gonna blow.
So is it smart for us as a country to move our logistics, meaning our transportation, so fast over to a propulsion system where
we're doing exactly the right thing now.
Okay, what does that mean?
Let battery technology evolve. Let the costs come down. Let the recharge times drop. Let the battery EVs become, in terms of daily usage and ability to go long trips without having to wait in line at a charge point, if they become as convenient as IC engines, they'll take over all by themselves. And I think right now the U.S. government policy is exactly the right one.
So you don't think we're at a competitive disadvantage by not moving at the pace that China is?
I don't buy that. I don't think the Chinese have any EV technology that American companies or Tesla don't have. I think they just produce excellent quality at low cost, and they do good EVs, but they're not ahead in battery technology or motor technology or anything like that. So,
is there an issue that we base our propulsion system on, or let me rephrase the question? Is there a national security issue for us in that we haven't been as aggressive on mineral rights as China has?
Probably, but I think that's being corrected.
How do we fix that?
Well, there's a lot of investment now in U.S. rare earths, which were dangerously dependent on China at that point, and they did shut them off for a while, and that got our attention. But that can be fixed. I mean, a lot of these things are questions of national will, and companies like GM, I know, is working very heavily to reduce any dependence, and LG cameras, reduce dependence on China and gain, whether it's battery raw materials, battery themselves, electronic components, et cetera, is to gradually or as quickly as possible get out of the China orbit, which I do think from a national security standpoint, we cannot risk being dependent on China for technology, computers, computer chips, rare earth minerals, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to develop our own capability in those areas.
Do you think we can sell that concept to the average man where he currently is buying a Chinese TV for $250 and it's the size of your house? Can you sell him on the idea? You think we can do that?
I don't think it matters, frankly. I think with the right policies, that TV set goes from $450 to $600. So what? I mean, just look at the evolution of pickup prices. And we have yet to find the point where the average pickup buyer says, I'm not paying that anymore.
You always have a very efficient way of putting these things. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's continue our SWOT analysis, even though we kind of did a huge weave here. General Motors. What are they doing right? What are they doing
I
wrong?
think GM is doing, I have to say it, but GM is doing just about everything right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Nothing they're doing wrong.
I keep trying to think of a serious mistake they're making, and I frankly don't see one. I think Cadillac is in the process of a terrific renaissance that they could build on. The Blackwing sedan is
Magnificent.
arguably the best high-performance sedan in the world.
Magnificent.
And the EVs are great and are selling. The Cadillac Lyriq is the number one selling luxury nameplate EV in the
Do you think they're too dependent on EV over at Cadillac? There's too much mix of EV in the mix?
I think if I were,
You involved.
I had insights into GM, which I carefully would say I do not, but I would be very surprised if they aren't working a IC extension strategy for Cadillac, and they'll bring out more or continue more IC vehicles, or even introduce new IC vehicles. And somebody says, wait a minute, you were committed to an all-electric future. Yes, well, but the background changed.
Yeah, no, the world was moving under our feet.
We're now, like Barley said, we're now more in line with the natural adoption rate of EVs.
So
And there is actually, Tesla is momentarily having some problems, but General Motors EVs are doing well.
okay,
Relative.
you say you don't see any weak spots. Do you think the Celestiq was a good idea?
Celestiq was, it's one of those vehicles where it doesn't matter whether they sell 10 or 300 or 3,000. It's out there as the Cadillac flagship.
So it was an exercise.
And every luxury brand needs some almost unattainable flagship. And I think it's certainly speculation that GM has not denied that the Soleil convertible
Beautiful.
will come out as a limited edition. It's off the Celestiq platform.
Beautiful.
And that will probably, start at 700,000, 750,000. Doesn't matter. And they'll sell a handful. They're basically hand-built at the Tech Center anyway. And will those make money? No. But it's an alternate form of marketing and showing that we don't take a backseat to Mercedes. We don't take a backseat to Bentley. We are a premium luxury brand that has to be taken seriously. And if you don't have that flagship, it's very hard to be taken seriously. You've got to have that aspirational, almost unattainable for most people product at the top.
How does that filter down to the the actual nuts and bolts of car sales. So that's 3 reasons. How does that filter down?
It doesn't have to filter down any way except the image of high-priced success.
So it goes back to what you said earlier. People don't buy cars on practicality. They buy it whatever's in their head. So do you think there's room?
Also, the reason for Cadillac's commitment to racing.
Oh, I think that's genius.
And you saw they took first and second.
Yeah.
Sebring 6.
I met the guy doing the guy designing all of the livery. And he was at Bob's party. We're going to love this. He personally drives a Mitsubishi Pajero Ralliart Evo. Like, for what he spent to bring it over from New Zealand, he could have bought a Quattro Sport. Remember those back in the day? Wasn't worth a couple $100,000 now. Anyway, great guy. Do you think Cadillac has room for, like, I saw you got an XLR still in the garage over there. Do they have room for a convertible Corvette, like a Corvette platform with a Cadillac sexy body on it?
I think there's probably room for it, but I think there are other priorities that are more important.
So we back to the substitution analysis. We would take away 375 sales.
Cadillac could do an equivalent of the Bentley Bentayga,
Yeah.
but styled better, with either electric or a V8,
Yeah.
plug-in hybrid system, priced at, say, 250, 300,000. So there's all kinds of opportunities for Cadillac.
What about Buick?
Buick is astonishingly successful.
Because of the Vista.
Well, the Envision, the Enclave, all Buicks are.
Have they gotten off of the dependence to China? Are they successful now in the U.S. again?
Oh yeah. They're, I think, up to like 300,000. I'm not sure, but Buick is solidly back on the road. I mean, in California, you never see any American cars anyway.
Invistas? Everybody buys an Invista. You'd be shocked how many you see on the road. The Invista and the Trax, stroke of genius from General Motors. By bringing out a $23,000 car that looks good, you're bringing people from, like, everybody I know that owns a Trax or an Invista, they could have afforded a Highlander. They could have afforded a RAV4. And they're like, why do I spend 40 grand on a RAV4? I could bought this thing for 28 grand fully loaded. And it's a nicer looking car.
Yeah.
I think GM needs to do more of that, but we're not here what I think. We're here what you think.
Yeah, well, California is a generational issue, but the one thing that's successful in California is not American passenger cars. It's trucks and SUVs.
Yes, sir, it
And as long as that trend continues, and now that the California EV mandate is gone,
Yeah.
and CARB is basically, like, put it this way, out of business, there's no reason for California not to buy Yukons, Tahoes, full-size pickup trucks, Ford F-150s, and
They were still selling, even in the face of the past 4 years. So let's switch gears. Let's do a lightning round. So not as much, not as in depth. Let's start BMW. Well, how are they doing?
I think they have a design problem right now. I think people are buying BMWs despite the design because they're telling themselves, well, it's ugly, but it's a BMW. And I think they're on the two problems with BMW. I think the same problem as Mercedes, by the way. A product line that is so broad that nobody can oversee it anymore.
Yeah.
And some of the things are so off to the fringes that they never sell. And
They're
nobody,
getting rid of some of those.
whatever happened to such and such? Like the 1 Series, or was it the 2 Series? No, it was the 1
Oh, the 2 Grand Coupe.
convertible.
Yeah.
I mean, these are like little tiny niches that shouldn't be filled. And it'd be a better company with a stronger focus if they would trim both ends of the product line and not do notchback sedans and fastback sedans off the same architecture. I mean, you talk about substitution, there you had it.
So they famously, like you said, GM came to the EV market late. BMW came even later. How are they doing in EV?
In EVs?
Yeah,
I
execution.
don't know how they're doing in Europe. I think they're kind of, no, they were actually among the first with the i3.
That was like a science project.
Yeah. You still see the occasional one in Ann Arbor.
I'm going to buy one because I have got free charging at my hangar. I got a 240 plug and City of Torrance pays for the electricity. I'm going to buy one just because I want free gas. It'll pay for itself. But I don't mean the sales. I mean product-wise.
As you buy a Chevy Bolt,
It's more expensive. I can get an i3 for like nothing. A Bolt's more expensive because it's got more range. But from an EV point, not so much a sales point of view, how are they doing from like just the product EV wise? Do you think they executed well like General Motors, or did they execute poorly like Chrysler or Stellantis?
GM currently.
I mean BMW. How did they?
No, I think I'm answering your question.
Got it.
I think currently GM builds among the best EVs in the world. Technologically, reliability, functionality, the integration of Super Cruise, which will, continue on more and more types of roads, and ultimately, use AI to replicate the Tesla non-mapping system, which will be overlaid on the Super Cruise maps. So I think I don't think the European EVs are quite up to the standard of the best American EVs.
Okay, so moving along in our lightning round, here's a bit of a curveball. Mercedes. How are they doing?
I think, well, once again, I don't like most of the designs, but it doesn't seem to matter too much. I think part of the problem with Mercedes is they risk losing the luxury image by building more and more affordable products that are predominantly sold on leases. And they will face with the agreed yesterday 15% tariff on imported products. That'll be diluted by the fact that Mercedes also exports U.S. production to Europe, so they won't feel the full impact of the tariffs, but they will feel pricing pressure. And a lot of people are wringing their hands and say, oh my God, what with tariffs? The prices BMWs, Audis, and Mercedes-Benz is going to go up as well. No kidding. That's what tariffs are for. It's supposed to make imports more expensive. At any rate, I think they're okay. I don't think they're brilliant. I don't think Mercedes and BMW cars now have any sort of a technological lead on. Back in 40 years ago, if you wanted dual overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, electronic ignition, single point electronic ignition, fully independent rear suspension, you had to have a BMW or a Mercedes. Now, all of that technology is everywhere. So there's really no technological reason to buy a German luxury brand anymore. And it's people still do because of the built-up belief system, which has been carefully managed.
All very human.
Carefully managed. Cadillac and Lincoln trashed it about 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, and they're gradually rebuilding out of the ashes, with Cadillac perhaps a little bit ahead of Lincoln. But Mercedes and BMW, and arguably Audi, never lost it, and they've always maintained the premiumness of the image, which is what makes people buy it. Are they getting a better car? I don't think so.
Okay, so they're crosstown rival. How's Porsche doing?
I think they're doing well. It's a great brand. And now with the pressure off of EVs, it opens the floodgates to the Boxsters and the 911 variants and so forth.
Do you think they'll make the investment and say scrap the platform that was only
I
electric?
don't think they'll scrap anything. I think they'll just add.
They'll add. Okay, now switching gears to a completely different one, Toyota. How are they doing?
I think Toyota is a brilliantly managed company with a deliberate low cost base. geographically diversified, and they build a vehicle which is Toyotas are built down to a cost, and they're reliable. I don't think any more so than any good product from Korea or the U.S. anymore, but they still have that belief system in the public. With Toyota, you get the ultimate in reliability and quality. But you drive a recent Toyota, they're not very refined. Even
Very loud. Very loud. They had no insulation whatsoever.
give you an anecdote. We had, as you recall, the Pontiac, and Toyota actually built them for
Vibe. Pontiac Vibe.
Pontiac Vibe.
Lion.
And I forget what the name of the Toyota equivalent Toyota product was. They kind of looked, they had different sheet metal, but overall shape and everything, they were technologically identical. The Vibe was the harshest, noisiest vehicle that GM had on the market. It was also, in terms of customer reported problems, one of the worst that we made.
Really?
Yeah, and we talked to Toyota especially about the noise and harshness complaints. Toyota had a team of engineers and they drove a bunch of Vibes. And their conclusion was it's appropriate for its price class.
Fascinating. I did not know this about that car.
Yeah. So it's clear that the formula is working for them.
Do you think they've obviously famously came to the EV party late because they're doing hybrids and they invented it and they're doing it well. They've recently now stepped it up. Is that the smart thing to do, or should they go back to just hybrids?
I think the new Prius will do well because
It's a great car. But they just, like, when I say just, like in June, they just announced a fully electric ES. They've fully electric, a lot of fully electric. They're trying to get better at. Is that the right move for them, or should they continue to stick with
a
hybrid?
necessary move because they're about 5 years late to the party.
So being that they've already been so invested in hybrid, is that a problem for them being late to the party?
I think, all companies are kind of victims of their own success.
Yeah.
Whatever is working for them, they're reluctant to change. And we know that Akio Toyoda was a vocal critic of electrification.
Very much so.
So it obviously wasn't going to happen on his watch.
Yeah.
So they're playing catch up, arguably at exactly the wrong time
Yes.
when the new administration agrees with Akio Toyoda. So whether they'll cancel some...
Did you guys ever hang out? Did you guys spend time together, you and Akio? Did you and Akio ever spend time?
I never met him.
So
I met his dad and various other Toyota CEOs, but never Akio.
okay, so the last of the lightning round, Tesla. How are they doing?
Well, I think they're doing well, but I think they have two problems. And one is aging architectures. They can update over the air and make the cars better and better, but at some point, no matter how good a design is, it's going to get dated. And I know they did some tweaks to the Model Y, but where's the redo of the Model S? Where's the redo of the Model 3? What are they going to do about the Model X, which never really took off anyway? They got to scrap, in my judgment, do an all-time run of the Cybertruck and put them in a warehouse and sell them off a little bit at a time. But that thing is never going to really, that thing is never going to hit the mainstream. Let's face it, it was a mistake.
Yeah.
It's ugly, it's overly heavy, it's gross looking on the road. It just is everything wrong with that thing. However, I mean, they got good electric technology. Their autonomous technology is entirely different from General Motors, which is based on mapping roads. whereas theirs is on replicating human inputs and translating them into the car, which ultimately is going to win
Why?
because they'll get it perfected and this
Scalable.
operate everywhere, whereas the General Motors Super Cruise system only operates on highways that have been mapped. So I think there are a lot of things they're doing right. There's certainly their manufacturing is good. They've got good battery suppliers. And right now they're suffering because the liberals are disappointed in Elon Musk's embrace of conservative values. But, you know, the American public has a short memory and
Somewhat related. Scout, Lucid, and Rivian. Do they all continue to exist, or do any of them go away? If so, what is why?
I'd see Rivian as at risk
Oh, why is that?
because they consistently lose money. They've never had a profitable quarter. Their sales volume is not expanding. And at some point, you know, if you can't live on the promise of the hockey stick, well, when we bring this one out, it's really going to take off. At some point, the investors are going to stop putting money in it.
Yeah.
I think Lucid is okay because that's some sort of Saudi Arabian.
They got the money smartly from Saudi Arabia, not China, and they got it quicker.
Every time the cash gets a little low, the Saudis send another billion.
Do you see the Saudis taking it all?
Don't spend it all at once because you know it's real money. They said, "Oh no, we'll take good care of it." I think Rivian is going to be okay.
Do you
But
think
so Rivian is, again, all of these companies were conceived at a time before companies like Kia, Hyundai, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, Mercedes, and BMW got into the EV business. And they thought they were only competing against Tesla. That's the mistake that Henrik Pfister made. And by the time it comes out, they're looking at a competitive field that is hugely different from the one they envisaged when they made the initial investment. So I think the Lucid Air is a fantastic car. I've driven it. I love it.
Yeah.
I think it looks good. It drives great. 600-mile range. I mean, what's not to like? But there's a lack of brand recognition. I mean, a lot of times people ask me, well, if you didn't have the loyalty to General Motors or Ford or Stellantis, what would you drive? I'd say I'd drive a Lucid Air. A what? Lucid. Who are they? They make electric vehicles. Really? They won Car of the Year. Really? And I mean, there's just a total lack of awareness. They're not on most people's shopping list. But, you know, that'll get fixed over time.
Now, for the SWOT analysis, of course, we can't forget Stellantis. We already covered a lot of it, but
Well,
what are we
I
missing?
covered it peripherally, but I think it's probably struggling with too many brands. I mean, they got all the European brands, all the Fiat brands, Peugeot, Citroën, Opel, Vauxhall, etc. And then they got the U.S. And at any rate, it's hard to manage. And Europe is a problem. With the last quarter, I think they lost $2 billion, which is not a surprise. And Tavares really failed to understand that the heyday of the U.S. post-COVID catch-up market was over. And he insisted on a pricing policy for Chrysler products in the U.S. that simply wasn't realistic. And they lost a lot of market share. And it's got to be won back, which is a hard slog, but I think it's a capable company. And as long as Stellantis global leadership realizes that the U.S. is the one that's keeping the rest of Stellantis afloat and give the U.S. the resources that it needs and deserves, I think Stellantis will make a comeback.
Do you think the unions are a bigger problem over there or here?
I think the problem over there is a combination of government regulation, unions, CO2 regulation, and Chinese incursions. I wish them luck because I like Stellantis and I especially like the U.S. component.
Okay, so Bob, we've covered a lot of topics today, and we kind of got off cars into the general economic as well as cultural realm. But I want to bring something closer to home. You have been incredibly kind in your career to open your office and now your home for me to come in and talk to you. And I can't thank you enough for that. And for me, you've helped me grow my business. But, I chat with people, and whether they're in the car world or not in the car world, they know who you are. And you have a legacy already. You've got a legacy of this brash car executive that, says things that might offend people, but brought amazing cars to life over a 50-year period. What's the legacy you're most proud of? What do you want your legacy to be?
I think the legacy the thing I would like to be remembered for is that I was an effective leader and did a lot of societal good in terms of job creation or job maintenance, and providing returns to shareholders. So despite the probably more controversial aspects of my personality, or perhaps because of the more controversial aspects of my personality, I've been successful at doing the things that I most wanted to do, which is help teams run successful car companies and do it through persuasive, effective, energetic, and convincing leadership. And if I want to be remembered for anything, I'd like to be remembered as a guy who was trained in leadership by the Marine Corps, brought those leadership principles to the civilian world, and did so effectively.
Bob, I can't thank you enough for this time,
George.
and all the time you open up for just me to have cigars off camera as well. Thank you, sir, for everything.
Yeah, well, let's not quit now.
We're not quitting anytime soon. I'll be back, and you're going to have more cigars.
Okay. Excellent.
Bis später.